All waste is lost profit, a concept that many in our line of work accept as a truism. And yet, despite the seeming incontrovertibility of this statement, I've come to the conclusion after 17 years, both here with the City of Sacramento and with the City of Redlands, that most contractors and commercial waste generators don't get it. There are a number of reasons for this. They range from our inability to truly incentivize the person that makes waste disposal and recycling decisions to the difficulty many people have changing the way they've always done business. Nonetheless, it is this fact or condition that has required us to become regulators. You're all used to that more than we are, I think, those of you who work for the state. But in any event, it's required us to adopt ordinances and to require recycling as a condition of the development in the absence of voluntary compliance. Politically, there's always some risk when we regulate development. For our part, we appealed to our City Council's sense of environmental stewardship and the need to address waste issues at the front end of development. And so with that introduction, I'd like to talk a little bit about City of Redlands recycling ordinance. City of Redlands City Council adopted its ordinance in the spring of 2003. So our ordinance has been in place now for about 3 years. I probably have about, I would guess, around 275 permits covered under that ordinance. Some of those permits cover subdivisions with as many as 100 houses. So that doesn't sound like a lot, but it covers a lot of development. There are two parts to our ordinance. The first part pertains to the recycling of construction debris. Demolition permits and building permits are not issued until a recycling plan is submitted for our approval, and that's the approval of solid waste staff. That's an important point that I want to make. Second part of the ordinance pertains to post-occupancy. That is to say, building permits, similarly, are not issued until a recycling plan for recycling post-occupancy is submitted and approved. Elements of the plan include the materials that are targeted for recycling, the flow of materials through the facility as a precaution for removing architectural barriers to recycling. And there's a whole section related to an education plan for tenants and employees, including but not limited to things like signage. In effect, our recycling ordinance conditions properties through the building permit process to require recycling following occupancy. So how does that work? A new tenant calls our office to start commercial collection. Because it is a new facility or a facility subject to recent tenant improvements, our customer service representatives know that the facility is required to have an approved recycling plan. And so when and if the property manager objects to subscribing to our recycling service, fat chance. They're informed that recycling is a condition of the development, and in effect they're told that it is required under ordinances, and in some cases we simply go to the file, we make a copy of the recycling plan, provide it, and we have our recycling coordinator follow up. The city's imposition of a recycling plan tied to issuance of the permit is regulatory friendly, easy, and convenient. Compact discs like these, I've got some here for you if you like, are available on public counters, both in building and safety and in the utilities department where I work. And the information is also available on our website. More often than not, contractors and developers are invited to my desk or one of the engineers' desk where we write the plan in their presence. It only takes a few minutes. It's an opportunity for us to talk to them about things like LEED, about CalMax, about the recycle store, about the local reuse store that's operated by Habitat for Humanity. And so it's a process that's often educational and easy for developers to comply with at the front end. Many contractors and developers have commented that our permit requirements related to recycling are the easiest permit requirements to comply with when compared with other permit requirements at the city. So we actually get some good marks in that respect. So we make it easy and convenient for them, at least at the front end, and we emphasized this approach to doing business when we presented our ordinance to the City Council for adoption. And finally, contractors and developers are required to submit documentation of compliance, which is then tied to the issuance of their certificate of occupancy. And that's a pretty good hammer to have in our business, because if your certificate of occupancy is held up on a large facility that can cost you thousands of dollars a day. So in any event, I've brought a number of copies of the disc, and please see me afterwards if you'd like that. It includes a copy of the council report, the ordinance. It includes the blank forms, and it includes model recycling plans, local recycling directory, all the information that people have if they want to attack this on their own, as opposed to sitting at my desk or one of the engineers' desks for a few minutes. I think I'd like to talk a little bit at this point about what works and what doesn't work. Well, first of all, the large majority of our developers and contractors substantially comply with the construction requirements. Some, a small portion, partially comply, and a very small minority fail to comply at all or substantially in non-compliance. Second, the city's recycling ordinance is unique to the extent that it conditions property post-occupancy. That is something that is at least as important, if not more important, than just targeting construction debris. Remember, most development is, for all intents and purposes, for in perpetuity. And an ordinance that requires recycling from future tenants quickly exceeds the waste targeted by an ordinance that only addresses construction and demolition debris. So I think that's something unique about our ordinance. And third, the city regards its recycling ordinance, however imperfect, as its best tool for expanding its construction and commercial recycling opportunities. So what doesn't work? How do you deal with people that don't comply? Citing someone for a violation of the municipal code after they've landfilled recyclable C&D waste isn't very productive, and holding up their certificate of occupancy indefinitely doesn't make sense either. So on that basis, I have some recommendations for those of you who plan to develop or design your own ordinances. First of all, I recommend that you do include post-occupancy requirements. Remember, most developments are for in perpetuity. They're there forever, and that means that post-occupancy requirements ultimately result in more waste diversion than C&D requirements in and of themselves. Second, it's very important to consider one's interdepartmental relationships when you design your ordinance. In general, I recommend that you reserve as much authority as possible for yourself, that the ordinance be drafted to insert your organization into the administration of the ordinance as much as possible. Remember, your greatest challenges are likely to come from within. They are likely to come from other city departments, legal counsel, building and safety officials, and community and planning development departments are not interested parties in your endeavor. Third, I recommend that you include deposits that are refundable based on the level of compliance. We've heard a good example here today, and that's something we're probably going to go back and do. I'm in discussions with our city manager and city council or city attorney at this time. We didn't initially because of opposition, but we think we're going to go back and do that. I think there's support for doing it, despite some initial concern on the part of our legal counsel that such fees may be illegal. Remember, don't call them fees, because if they're a fee, they're subject to Prop 218, and that means they have to be cost-based. We're going to call them an incentive and disincentive. We'll see. And fourth, notwithstanding number three, be practical. It is our bane as public servants that all of our authority comes from our respective city councils and boards of supervisors, and that developer interests are far-reaching. And I would like to suggest that an imperfect ordinance is better than none. And so by the same token, the best solid waste projects are always a matter of political will. And I think it's our responsibility in this context to be cogent and effective salesmen for good ordinances. And so in conclusion, if you don't have an ordinance, I encourage you to develop one, exercise leadership, and take risk, because that's what it takes. And that concludes my presentation. I have copies here of my CD, and I want to thank the Waste Board for inviting me to be here.